I'm going to turn it over to Marlon Winger here. Marlon is a tri-state soil health person that lives over in Casper, Wyoming. He oversees Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. So I think a lot of you have already probably met Marlon. If you haven't, he's a treat. So, Marlon, here you go.
Okay, I don't need that.
Okay.
But I do need somebody to keep me on time, so give me a 5-minute get off the stage notice.
I'll do my best.
Okay. Thank you, folks. This is quite a treat. I think we was talking to Joyce last night, and I think this is the 12th annual Soil Health Workshop in Idaho Falls. That is pretty sweet. As I travel the West, I talk about Idaho Falls and Burley workshops and how these communities have kind of come together and are learning together. So, you know what I realize is I don't have the clicker. We're all familiar with the principles of soil health, and when I left Boise and became a soil health specialist, I was really excited to learn all about measuring soil health. And that kind of quickly faded. And so the theme of my last 5 years has been an emphasis on the principles of soil health, not necessarily how to measure it. And I love Gabe Brown's thought. These principles are universal. They are nature's principles, and how you implement them is unique to your own operation. And that's the challenge, because as I go to different counties in the West, everybody is doing a different scenario, but these same 5 principles are nature's foundation. These principles are how the soils were formed and how they've become to function. I'm going to save. I want to show you this little video. We shot this in October of this year. Can you make that play, or do I push it again? So this was October, freezing cold, and we interviewed 7 producers throughout the state of Idaho, through southeastern Idaho. We looked at some no-till sugar beet production, some of the first in the state. So they're planting no-till. Of course, you got to harvest the beet. So they're learning to take 1 step forward in their operation, 2 steps forward, maybe 1 step back. We brought in a film crew. We got to interview some very passionate producers. Some of these guys are from, some of these producers are here, some are in the Burley area. Look at that fist pump. That was from the producers. They were pretty excited or the fist pump was from the videographers. But we got to interview some very passionate producers. Felt like the middle of winter to us. We saw some new technology. This is a stripper header in Soda Springs, Idaho area. We're starting to see them quite a bit in the Montana area. Herd of elk ran us over almost. You'll see this guy, he's here today. The beard stole the show. This guy, Dan Leakey there, I went to Kansas. Everybody knew Dan Leakey in Kansas. So the cool thing was each one of these producers are advancing soil health on their operations. Do they have everything figured out yet? No. Are they advancing soil health? Yes. And it's kind of a trial by error. But if you're not making a few errors, you're not moving very far. So anyway, one thing that I've learned about soil health compared to what I knew 15, 20 years ago in my career, Early in my career, I was focusing on one square on this picture, and I couldn't see the whole. But when I meet with producers, these innovative producers around the West, I realize they've taken a step back and can squint their eyes. Can you guys all squint your eyes and see this picture a little bit better now? Boyd, do you see it? Abe Lincoln, huh? But when you're standing this close to the screen, sometimes you can't see the whole. And Mother Nature works in wholes, and that's been a hard lesson for me to learn, because I think my agronomy training was to look at the individual square, but it helps to stand back, squint your eyes, and look at the whole. This is on Cameron Williams' farm in Grace, Idaho. And I think a lot of that young man, but this was a cover crop in 2018 in September. I just wanted to point out some of the species. This field was so thick. Of course, this was irrigated, but it was so thick you could hardly walk through it. I did venture about 3 or 4 steps from the swathed road, but the arrows are trying to point to impact forage collard. Can you see that big leaf? Boy, that is a tremendous cover crop, full of nutrition and high protein. BMR, which is brown midrib grazing corn in the mix. Faba bean, which is a new one that Cameron's been evaluating. I think every time I talk to Cameron, he says, "Marlon, do you know about faba bean?" I says, "No." So anyway, Cameron's one of these guys that if you have a cover crop question, here's the phone number, 1-800-CAMERON. But faba bean is a kind of a dual purpose cool season, warm season legume. In Fallon, Nevada, 2 years ago or a year ago, they had it in overwintering plots in Fallon, Nevada. So it was overwintering like a winter pea. So I think it's a new one to get a little more attention to. Sunflower, of course, and maybe you can see the Phacelia blooming in there, a prolific bloomer. So anyway, just of the principles that I showed on the first slide, the toughest one for us as producers and agronomists to get our heads wrapped around continues to be diversity. It's a tough one to get our head wrapped around, but it is how nature functions, is through diversity. And in traditional ag, we have really drifted away from diversity. And as we drift farther away from that principle of nature, we start having more issues and problems. So this diversity, that's a beautiful picture to me. It should be on the calendar. It should be at the Super Bowl halftime. Yay. So here's another challenge we have, and I get this all over the West. "Marlon, I can't grow a cover crop." I says, "Well, you probably can't, but your neighbor's doing it somehow." And here's just an example. This is actually a slide from Cornell University that gives an opportunity to say, here's your current practice, missed opportunities in that chart A. B gives us a post-harvest opportunity to fit something in. Chart C gives us a post-harvest and what does it say in there? Planting it in, letting it grow through, and then terminating it, letting it maybe age terminate. B is pretty traditional. D is one thing we're seeing a little bit more, or some interseeding opportunities. Maybe that species will overwinter for you and then terminate it green. A lot of your brothers from another mother in different counties of the U.S. are terminating cover crops green, meaning they're growing them up, they're terminating them, planting them within days of each other. So just some opportunities. How you figure this out is universal, or is unique to your own operation, but the principle of a living root is how nature evolved. I've been working in Wyoming quite a bit because that's where my home office is, working with the state agronomist. This is our new list of the periodic table, and you guys have seen this at years past, but this is our newest list in Wyoming. So this evolved from, I went to Green Cover Seed in Nebraska. They had 95 species of cover crops planted in 5-acre plots by however long, 500 feet long, 1,000 feet long, I don't remember. And when we're looking at them, people would say, well, how does this graze? Like, how does sun hemp graze? Well, Keith would just keep telling us, turn around, because the cattle were here last week, clear across the whole plot. And so it was pretty neat. This chart is listed with smallest seed size on top, so I can't read that. I think teff is on the warm season grass, 1.3 million seeds per pound, down to corn. Now be careful in your own state or in your own county to follow state seed laws. There's some issues in Idaho with soybean and cowpeas with the non-phaseolus bean rule. But there's quite a list of cool season legumes, and I've seen most of them, and the ones I don't know, I call that 1-800 number. This is some work done by Jay Fuhrer from North Dakota. This is his multi-species mix. They took the plant, balanced it on his hand. The top half of the plant went in a sample, and the bottom half of the plant went in a sample. So, if I can read this, cowpeas, the top half, what is it saying? 14.8%, the bottom half 4.3%. Look at the millets. Now the millets, for some reason, don't hold on to their feed value very long, 9.7 compared to 1.77. So this is why guys like Jay say, there's no sense of grazing the bottom half of these cover crops because there's not much in them. Leave that bottom half, or whatever you can leave, to provide soil armor, which is the first principle of soil health. Because if you don't have soil armor, you're not starting with very much. If your field is, help me out with this slide, guys. If your field is naked, thirsty, hungry, running a fever, you're not getting very far. Even some guys will plant cover crops and moldboard plow them in. I'm telling you, you didn't make better than nothing maybe, right? But you didn't go very far. So the interesting thing in this slide is twisted just a little bit, but the bottom, he sampled what he thought that, the cow would take half of each plant. So does this guy, you cowboys, if this guy was grazing this field, does he need a protein lick tub? No, not at 26% protein. In fact, it probably needs more carbon in it. It's got plenty of protein. Interesting what nature can do for you. So I want to share just a few how some of our guys. This is Big Jake. I forget his last name. I meet so many people I can't even remember my friends in Idaho anymore. This is Jake. Has not attended a soil health workshop. Only his fencing partner, they have a fencing company, and who's done some equip and was very successful his first couple of years. So Jake, just talking to his neighbor, sold the hay equipment. He's a cattle producer. He's not a crop farmer. He's a cattle producer. Sold the hay equipment so he could buy a no-till drill and a weed sprayer. I go, Jake, have you lost your mind? He says, this is so successful on the neighbor's farm. Why won't it work on mine? So this is Jake's first year, taking out 250, maybe 300 acres of old hay ground. And in Wyoming, a whole old hay ground is smooth brome with one alfalfa plant on the podium. It's like, I think this should have been taken out long ago. So guys like Jake say, this hay field is not even hardly producing, on a good year will produce 1.5 tons of hay. On an average year will produce 1 ton to the acre. So Jake follows the principles of soil health. The guy in the blue is the district conservationist. They follow the principles of soil health, minimizing disturbance. So Jake decided to use a herbicide to terminate the grass. Planted with a John Deere disc drill, multi-species cover crop, diversity. Then he's grazing this. And it's a I don't remember the mix, guys, 10 or 13 way mix, growing a living root as much as possible, warm and cool season grasses, and then he's grazing this. And now Jake and some of these Wyoming guys were teaching to be carbon neutral. And that's a North Dakota term, but carbon neutral means where the carbon was produced, we're leaving the carbon where it came from. So even if we cut hay off a field, it is fed back on that field. They are learning to be, they're not exporting that carbon. And today you will hear Christine talk. Her whole talk is focused on carbon. So Big Jake, first year. Some of Jake's cover crops went 9 ton to the acre dry matter. Compared to an above average year, 1.5 tons on above average precip. So these guys like Jake, and I'll show you many more, are going, oh my gosh, what am I? So they're rediscovering these multi-species cover crops. So in a sense, they're trading swathing, baling, hauling for cover crop seed drilling. See that trade-off? So many of these guys in Wyoming that we've been working with, they tell me even after years of frustration, of drought, of poor establishment, we will always have a couple hundred acres of multi-species cover crop on our ranch, on their ranch, to graze, to try to get rid of that hay system. Here's Jake, part of the farm through Equip, which is a pain in our shorts, but in Wyoming, part of the farm had to be planted to a crop rotation. And so the crop rotation was a Sudan grass millet. I forget the millet, foxtail millet or German millet. I lost my wedding ring in here. And when I got home, the wife said, well, can't you go back and find it? So I'm wearing one of these little rubber silicone wings. This is the cool part that Big Jake's doing, though. He's trying to get rid of that right there. He's getting rid of that right there, and we'll be grazing this. Now, this is first year, and so part of the thing we're talking with Jake is maybe we probably need to learn how to swath graze some of this in case we get, that 3 feet of snow like we got yesterday in Wyoming. This is what we're talking about, minimizing the soil disturbance on the top right. This is in Hewlett, Wyoming, spraying out crested wheatgrass, smooth brome monocultures. There's the amount of disturbance we're doing, plus a chemical application. Wheatland, Wyoming, some of the most degraded soil in the United States of America, in my opinion, because we've wheat fallowed that ground for nearly 100 years now, and it's productivity is pretty well shot. I think the only way these farmers are making a go of it is every year is a disaster payment. So the guy on the right is the district conservationist. This producer we're working with, Jason, now has 1,000 acres of multi-species cover crop, back-to-back, no fallow in the system, back-to-back multi-species cover crop grazed. Now, that's how he's implementing the principles of soil health. 1,000 acres of their 5,000 acre farm, because the other 4,000 is not very productive. He's the farmer, the wife's the cowboy. And I asked her, I says, are you guys going to put more cover crops in? Only if he'll let me. If the husband will let her, because they're making it go. One of the challenges we see, and this is an old picture at the Plant Materials Center in Aberdeen, but when our carbon to nitrogen ratios are so low that there's no carbon left on the soil, springtime comes and the soil is bare naked, thirsty, hungry, running a fever, right? So one of the challenges we've learned years ago. Now, if you have issues and you have to plant a monoculture, whatever, but just realize that you may get into problems. This is one of my new friends, and one of Brett's friends too, Rick Bieber. Would you not call him a friend? Brett, yeah. Rick gave me this slide. Here's the impact on I'm saying this theme, bare naked, thirsty, hungry, running. That should have been the title of my talk. Look at that raindrop energy hit that bare soil. we have all seen the still picture, but this should pull at your heartstring. Look at that energy come back into the center after it blows out the edge. As that energy comes back, do you see that? Blowing soil organisms all over our leaf surfaces. Rick Bieber, South Dakota. He's a guy that on his operation has started figuring this out. Now, when you talk to Rick, he'll say, yeah, I just got back from Russia last week, right? Or he's spending a lot of time overseas. Who's this? Doug Carr. This is Doug Carr's second year. The first year he planted Willow Creek winter wheat and had a little moisture in this, cut it for hay. Then he planted as soon as they got the hay off, they planted a multi-species cover crop. They had enough rain that year. They got another almost 2 ton of cover crop that they winter grazed. So Doug, when we met with him this year, 2019, to help him plan his cover crop mix, when we got to the farm, he already had an 18-way cover crop mix planned. I don't know if he's been calling Cameron or what the hell he's been doing. This guy said, what do you think about this mix? And it's like, who taught you this mix? He says, oh, we had so much time we didn't have to feed hay this year. We worked on our conservation plan all winter long. So this is what Doug's doing in 2019 and 20. This is Doug's second year. He's planting winter wheat. This is all on wheat fallow ground that they rented. Beat to death wheat fallow ground. So they're no-tilling winter wheat, cutting it for hay, feeding it back on. But after they cut the hay, then they're planting multi-species cover crop, gonna swath the cover crop and double rake it into windrows so that they can winter graze the windrow and then plant the Willow Creek winter wheat in between the windrows. It's like, holy mackerel, Doug. See, that when the producers learn these principles, their minds, these innovators, they really come up with some crazy things. First time I've ever heard a guy say, will this work, Marlon? Of course it'll work because it's following the principles of nature. We just need a little moisture to make it work. So did you guys understand that? Let me just review. He's gonna swath his Willow Creek winter wheat, bale it for hay. He's gonna plant a multi-species cover crop. He's gonna swath the cover crop, double rake it, and then get his Willow Creek winter wheat planted again by September 1st, September 10th. So the guy's got a living root in the soil all the time. Anyway, just kind of interesting. Now, Doug's system kind of crashed in 2019 because he didn't have the biology to support the plant growth. Does it look a little nitrogen deficient? Yes. Yeah, it's a little biological deficient. The squirrel cage wasn't moving fast enough for Doug. Whoop. We got a few guys from Soda Springs area here, and me and Cameron, we got together and says, hey, let's do a little grant where we're going to introduce some intercropping. And me and Cameron said, well, we'll get a grant. We'll get these guys to do 5 acres. Was it 5 acres, Cameron? 5 acres. Cameron met with the guy and says, no, if we're going to do it, let's do a 100-acre test plot. It's like, oh, my gosh. See these innovators. So they drove me by the field. This has been a couple of years ago now. And I says to myself, well, that mustard field's not too impressive. But underneath the mustard field, guys, was a crop of lentils. Fixing atmospheric nitrogen for the mustard crop, right? Here's a picture of garbanzo beans and flax. So 2 rows of flax is the tall, darker green, and garbanzo beans down the side. So we learned this from Derek Axton in Saskatchewan, Canada, who, last I heard, and I'm a little out of touch with Derek, his benchmark fertility was $300,000 an acre. Now it's cut down to $26,000 because every crop is grown with a legume. Now, how come are we not all over that technology, guys? Yeah. Do you think his wife maybe got a new front room set or replaced the old stove? I hope so. I don't know what this is. I'm hoping Dan will talk to this somehow. This new crop, parley. I'll let him explain it because it's way above me. But the concept is, and I hope it shows up, the first row can probably see it. It's after that nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen does not exist in the soil. It's not in a mineral, it's not in a rock, it's not in a clay. It comes from the atmosphere. What is it? 78% atmospheric nitrogen we breathe, but it's triple bonded, and so it's plant not available. So the biology makes it available. If you listen close, Christine's probably going to talk about, she'll talk about atmospheric nitrogen fixation, but she's also going to talk about some new little bugs, little teeny bugs that are fixing nitrogen for us. I've been working with, we're all familiar with biofumigation, plowing down these mustards. One of our challenges is, as we plow this down, what does our soil look like 3 days after we disc it down? Bare naked, thirsty, hungry, running in a fever, doesn't it? It's like, dang. So this was a good step, but since then I've met Kent Wittig from Allied Seed in Nampa. And Kent's been working with a company out of Germany, P.H. Peterson, and Rob here, I think, is also working with that company. If I might be mistaken, but I think the same. Learning to introduce some new cover crops. This is we're standing at the Parma Research Station with a couple Simplot guys, and Kent's showing us some nematode controlling radishes. So these are the biological answer for a handful of nematodes, like sugar beet cyst nematode. In Germany, you can't claim cover crop to be resistant until it's above 98% effective in nematode suppression. So you can say, oh, I got a good cover crop, but until it's 98% suppressive, you can't call it resistant to it. So I've been working with Kent. We've been looking at other cover crops that may be net neutral, meaning they don't let the nematode population get any worse, but they don't make it any better. So it's kind of a neutral player. Because one of the challenges is we can plant this control radish or whatever its name, master mustard or whatever. But I says, Ken, it's a monoculture, man. It's not fitting the principle of diversity. Now, if you may have a terrible problem with your nematode, maybe you got to go a couple years of this monoculture system. But what we've learned to do, working with Kent, is we've made an 8-way sugar beet mix and a 5-way potato mix to help suppress these nematodes. So anyway, I think there's a lot more future in this biological control. The guys in Germany basically don't fumigate for potatoes anymore because they're all growing nematode-resistant cover crops. In America, we have this many people trying to select for nematode-resistant cover crops. In Germany, there's 2 plant breeders that are looking at nematode-resistant. Dan, can you bring me up that water? Here's a new paper I read. It was new to me. What does the year say? Is it 2007? 1995 was one. 2003. This guy's describing mycorrhizal fungus. That's kind of one of the buzzwords if you go to any soil health meetings, right? Mary, we've talked mycorrhizal fungus every meeting. So he starts to describe it now. I can't read this very good, but he says that mycorrhizal fungus system has 2 types of mycelial networks. First is the runner. And I was describing this to my son who just graduated from the University of Utah. He's an engineer type. And I says, can you draw this on but I need it 3D and I need it to rotate. And he had it back to me the next day. It's like, good grief. The first type of network, the hypha that extend from the infection point into the soil matrix, they look for nutrient resources and new tips. So that's the big, broad bottom hypha that comes out of the root tip. The second type, and listen to this description, It's the absorbing networks have a distinct fan-shaped architecture, starting with a single large hypha, branching into 2 smaller hypha, branching into 4, and so forth, to an 8-order branching unit with 128 tips reaching into the soil ecosystem. So that's what I had my son make, a 128 branch tip in 3D. Gosh, I thought, when I read that and got this picture, this little video back from my son, I thought, man, now I have a little more appreciation for soil biology, because you can't love something unless you know it. So that was pretty cool to me. The bottom right picture is from Chris Nichols, showing a green root. They've stained it to show the glomalin. The little round spheres are the spores from the mycorrhizal fungus. For 100 years as an agronomist, we've all said plants can only absorb ammonium and nitrate. We've said that for 100 years. Dr. Amaranthus from UC Irvine and his colleagues put some quantum dots on, and I don't know what a quantum dot is, some sort of semiconductor material that they can see under the electron microscope. They attach the quantum dot to the amino acids. The picture on the left, the mycorrhizal hypha, is absorbing the amino acids right into the hypha. The picture on the right is the amino acid into the root system of the plant now. So at No-Till on the Plains last week, I got to go for the first time. Some of the speakers were talking about how these plants can absorb chelated amino acids. So then the plant doesn't have to break it down. They don't have to use all that energy from nitrate to make an amino acid. It's already absorbed as an amino acid. Made me feel like I was in kindergarten. Brian here, I know he's in 2nd grade. Did you feel like you were in 2nd grade, maybe 3rd grade? I felt like I was in kindergarten at the meeting last week. Here's a video that if you start to understand soil life, this is a Pseudomonas bacteria running up and down a fungus. Now, my question to you is, one of the practices we used to say was, plastic sterilize your soil. What is plastic sterilization, heat sterilization, going to do to these microorganisms? Kill them. So as an agronomist, that's what we were taught. Kill, 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 kill. Instead of live, 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 live. Because if you kill, you are not improving diversity. You are only going in the wrong direction. So we wonder, how does organic matter get down deep in our soils? Look, you got, this is not mycorrhizal fungus. This is I forget what the name of it is. But as that plant root goes deeper, the funguses can go deeper, and the soil biology can follow down these highways and interstates. That is pretty impressive to me. Now, these are things that we couldn't see 20 years ago, right? But as we understand soil life, this is how soil life builds. Just in closing, I have 3 or 4 slides on a sampling mechanism to help us measure soil health. One of these that we use, one of these tools in the toolboxes, is phospholipid fatty acid test. I think 20 years down the road, or even 10 years down the road, we'll say, oh, that was so funny. Do you remember when we tried to measure our soils with PLFA? Because I know this technology will increase. In fact, at the No-Till meetings, I talked to a company who's commercially makes it available to test your soil using DNA analysis. Phospholipid fatty acid is a snapshot of the soil community structure and its abundance. So it can tell the bacteria from the fungus, from the nematodes to the protozoa. They do this not through DNA analysis, but through lipid biomarkers. The best way to use this is to help compare management techniques. You know, healthy functioning system, highly disturbed systems. So from soil biology, this is what the phospholipid looks like. It's got a phosphate head on it. It makes up the cell membrane, but the fatty acid tails, or those little legs, that's what they're analyzing to show the different species of microorganisms. The phosphate head is quickly degraded, so this is not a soil sample that you let sit on the truck dash for a week and then you decide to turn it in. This is basically a living ecosystem that you send into the lab, so it has to be ice packed, you know, so that they don't degrade. It estimates the viable microbial biomass. So here it goes. Currently, this is about where the test is. They look at general bacteria. They can identify the gram-positive bacteria. These are the resident type bacteria, the more resistant bacteria to environmental stresses. The gram-negative species, these are the rapid strategists. The actinomycetes, they can look at the actinomycetes, which is not a bacteria, it's its own classification. They can analyze for mycorrhizal fungus. Of course, we know mycorrhizal fungus helps us with water, phosphorus, micronutrient, helps us to aggregate our soils. It also can analyze for saprophytic fungus and can separate the two. The saprophytic fungus is the fungus you can see when you pull over a decaying plant. That's the saprophytic fungus you can see. You can't see mycorrhizal fungus, as I understand it, with the naked eye. And it can also look at the protozoa. And it gives you a fungus to bacteria ratio. So here's a scientific article. Didn't have the greatest R-squared value, but they're trying to measure biological systems. The y-axis, the vertical axis, is aggregate stability. Remember when we dropped the soil clod in the water? That's aggregate stability. So after they soak these aggregates, they measure the diameter of that aggregate. The higher your microbial biomass gets through a PLFA has a positive correlation with aggregate stability. Who would have guessed? The more diversity you have, the more stable the aggregate. 2 weeks ago, just before no-till on the meetings, I had a little time to kill, and so Rick Haney had sent us some carbon dioxide sensors, and he attached them to a lid that you could screw on a pint jar. So we put our aggregates, our ground up aggregates, our smashed aggregates from our sample. So we have the good sample, crumble it, put 30 grams of soil in, and you screw the lid on, and it was given about 500 parts per million carbon dioxide, dry. Then you open the lid, you add 15 milliliters of water, and within seconds, soil life starts respiring. And so this computer program then, from my laptop, starts taking a CO2 measurement every 3 seconds. And so one line really had a pretty big graph, the top line, right? The bottom line, we did the same thing, opened the lid, put the water in, CO2, it started activating the biological system. This was bone dry soil. And so it started to climb, but not near the slope or near the rate of the top line. So the top line is a soil that I have in my office that I use for my aggregate stability test that is stable for weeks in the water. Really high functioning. The bottom soil will slake in 30 seconds. And so then I brought in the state agronomist because I was so excited to talk to somebody about this graph and what this graph means. The good healthy soil has so much biology in it that it is respiring and giving off CO2. So what drives photosynthesis? The gas. What gas is it? Carbon dioxide, right? So at Utah State University, how much time do I got left, Matt? You watching me? At Utah State University, they got the contract for this space station to grow wheat in space. And so they were seeing how much wheat they could grow, how many bushels of wheat they could grow, and the space station gave them 3 feet by 6 feet. And so that was their challenge, to learn how to grow enough wheat for the space station. Now we're currently not living up there, but one of the things I remember as a student there was they learned that in the greenhouse, if they increased carbon dioxide by burning natural gas, they could increase the amount of CO2 in the greenhouse, and they started increasing yield off this little square of wheat. It's like, wow, that's kind of cool. But we can't afford to burn natural gas in our crop production fields. So what is this graph telling us? This graph told me that the healthy soil is producing, and this picture is only an hour. I ran it for 2 hours. It went to about 1,500 parts per million at 2 hours. What is it showing now? About 1,300 parts per million carbon dioxide coming off this soil in parts per million. The poor functioning soil was only giving off, what? I can't even read that, 700? And so we started having this discussion about carbon dioxide as it relates to photosynthesis. What happens when you're in a little dry period and your stomate starts closing? It closes because it can't afford to lose water out of the stomate, right? The plant says, slow down, boys. The photosynthesis factory says, but we got to have more water to run photosynthesis. It says, sorry, we can't get it out of the root. So the stomate starts closing. Well, at 700 parts per million, you're not getting very much carbon dioxide through the stomate to run photosynthesis. Now, the same plant across the street may be going through a little dry scenario too, and it may have to close its stomate, right? But at least it's got a concentration of 1,500 parts per million CO2 entering into that stomate. So Christine Jones, if you listen careful, you won't even have to listen careful, but I'm pretty sure she will talk about photosynthetic capacity of your system and the photosynthetic rate. Listen to those 2 words when Christine comes. So it was just kind of a little revelation to me. It's like, oh my gosh, a good healthy soil is producing way more CO2. Now, if you watch a YouTube video, this is a cool video to watch. Ray Weil, how do you spell that? W-E-I-L? Is that right, Dan? W-E-I. Ray Weil Sare, S-A-R-E. And he talks about carbon dioxide quite a bit. And in some other Ray Weil videos, in the soil pit, Ray says, I think in the future that some scientists will show us that we are CO2 limited in some of our soils, meaning photosynthetic capacity is held back because there's not enough CO2 being evolved out of the soil. Do you guys remember when I showed the NASA video? Do you guys remember that NASA CO2? Where they monitored the CO2 and then during the growing season it went green. Do you remember that? Nod your head so I can see. And then after the growing season was over and tillage started, CO2 build up. But during the growing season, CO2 almost really ramped down, really went down. So this was kind of an aha moment for Marlon Winger. So 12 years ago when we started soil health in Idaho, we were kind of laughed at a little bit because they said, God only loves North Dakota. It's like, damn, this only works in North Dakota. Last year we had this guy come. Didn't we have Gabe come to Idaho Falls, right? This is an old sample. This is a slide set I had from Gabe showing his PLFA numbers. So as a fence line comparison, 2 years of mob grazing, multi-species cover crops on the left, no mob grazing on the right. They wanted to kind of prove to themselves that livestock integration was good for the system. So PLFA is measured in nanograms per gram at most labs. Total biology, 6,100 compared to 42. Bacteria, 4,400 compared to 3,300. Total fungus, saprophytic fungus, 786, so twice as much on the other. Bacteria to fungus ratio, mycorrhizal fungus almost doubled. Well, okay, that's easy to talk about because God only loves North Dakota. Here's another God only loves North Dakota.
What I want to do here today, and and I know you guys are extremely different probably than North Dakota, but don't look at what I do necessarily, look at the principles. The principles are the same and the ideas are the same, and the change is the same, and that's what you need to look at. I'm going to talk a bit.
That's another one of my heroes, Jerry Doan from God Only Loves North Dakota. And you can find that YouTube video. I'd love to bring him here for you cowboys to listen to. Jerry Doan, Utah is how you find him. Here's his sample in 2010. He said, man, we got pretty good numbers. Corn crop on one side of the field, corn followed by multi-species cover crop that was grazed. The fence line comparison was 2 years of multi-species cover crop grazed. Let's look at his numbers. 1,700 compared to 3,300. Total bacteria, 1,400 compared to 2,500. Actinomycetes, higher. Saprophytic fungus, 513 compared to 147. Look at the principle of diversity going here. This is the principle. Mycorrhizal fungus, 37 compared to 251. God only loves North Dakota. Then Jerry, I hope that number shows up. 4 years later, he says, oh man, I've been into this program for 4 years. Take the new PLFA numbers, 7,400 is his new numbers. The highest in North Dakota that has been measured. Now, I haven't seen Gabe's new numbers, but these are the highest numbers that I've seen. And Jerry says it's because of following the universal principles of soil health. What we found out was a miracle that God loves Idaho. I can't believe it. 2 states that he now loves. Total biology, this is a young kid, you guys know him, he'll speak today. Total biology, 7,800. What was Jerry's number? 7,400, right? Cameron's total bacteria numbers are higher than most people's total biology. Now, Cameron is under an irrigated scenario. The North Dakota guys are rain-fed only. So in my heart, I thought, man, I hope that Cameron's numbers come out higher because we can hit the button and make the water come on, right? But North Dakota guys, they just have to pray more. Actinomycetes, 2,000. Remember, they were like 300 or 400 in most of the other tests. Fungus, saprophytic, I can't remember, Cameron. I might have messed up. If that's saprophytic or mycorrhizal, I don't remember. 1,200, protozoa, 57. Now, here's a challenge for you. If you're looking through a microscope, you're going to see what? A ton of soil bacteria, right? And you're going to see 57 nanograms per gram of soil of protozoa. You'll probably be lucky to see a protozoa in the slide. So I kind of like this tool. Now, we spent a day or two with Jay Fuhrer last year, and we went to the field. The cool thing was Jay Fuhrer didn't say, I want to see your Haney test. I want to see your PLFA numbers. Cameron, he didn't ask for that data, did he? What did he always make sure he had? A shovel and an infiltration ring, right? We never once talked about a soil health test because Jay's trying to teach us to learn how to evaluate the soil with a shovel and an infiltration ring. Hopefully, see the little fat guy? That's Cameron's. They said you couldn't grow corn in Grace, Idaho. God loves Idaho. That's all I can say. What's your resource concern? I love this. This is a Gabe Brown slide. And then this morning, I suddenly noticed she didn't look so good. Well, as cattle producers, we can laugh and giggle about that one. But this morning, I suddenly noticed my soil on the right didn't look so good. I lost the function of my soil. Now, this is a North Carolina soil. High temperatures, high humidity, high rainfall, fence line comparison. Functioning soil on the left, soil that's in trouble. Am I in trouble too? Because I'm done.
Perfect.
So,
Give Marlon a hand.